They gave her mother a diamond necklace worth 10 grand and handed me a pair of socks, not even wrapped, just placed on my plate. My name is Tracy McCarthy. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom house in Jacksonville, Florida. I like my neighborhood because it's quiet. I've got a small porch where I drink my coffee in the mornings and a tidy kitchen I keep just the way I like it. I don't need much. But I've always believed in showing up for family, especially during the holidays. So, when my son Derek called at the start of December and invited me to Savannah for Christmas dinner, I didn't hesitate. It had been a while since I'd been included in one of their big gatherings. And even though the drive was 6 hours, I told him I'd be there. Derek and his wife, Kimberly, host a picture-perfect Christmas every year. The kind you see in magazines, coordinated decor, white plates that look like they've never been used, food arranged just so. And ever since Kimberly's mother, Joanne, moved to town, she's been front and center at every celebration. I pulled into their driveway on Christmas afternoon, right on time. The house looked like something out of a home design show. Perfectly trimmed hedges, a big red bow on the front door. Derek met me at the door with a quick side hug. "Glad you made it, Mom," he said before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Kimberly popped her head out just long enough to say, "Hi, Tracy, Merry Christmas," before returning to whatever she was stirring on the stove. Joanne, though she was settled in the best seat in the living room, legs crossed, glass of wine in hand, chatted with Kimberly's friends like she was hosting the whole thing herself. Every few minutes, someone would refill her glass, adjust the throw pillow behind her, or ask if she was comfortable. Me? I found a chair near the edge of the room and sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. Dinner was served at 6 sharp. The dining table was dressed in white linen with tall silver candlesticks, name cards for every guest, and matching cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. Joanne's seat was right in the middle next to Derek, like the guest of honor. I was placed at the far end near the sideboard where extra dishes were stacked. As plates were passed, conversations circled around Joanne. How she was enjoying her new yoga class, the kitchen remodel Derek and Kimberly had helped her plan, the girls' weekend trip she had coming up. My small attempts at joining in, a comment about the weather or a question about the new grandbaby, were met with polite nods and quick changes of subject. Then came the gift exchange. Derek stood up holding a small box wrapped in gold foil. "This one's for you, Joanne," he said, smiling wide. Everyone leaned in as she opened it. Inside was a sparkling diamond necklace, delicate chain, elegant setting. Kimberly clasped it around her mother's neck while people oohed and awed. "Just a little thank you," Derek said, "for always being there for us." They hugged her, kissed her on the cheek, toasted her with their glasses. Then Derek glanced toward me almost as an afterthought. "Oh, and for you, Mom," he said, reaching under the table. He set something on my plate. It was a pair of novelty socks, bright turquoise, with little cupcakes printed all over them. The cardboard tag was still attached. "Price, $35. No wrapping, no card." Kimberly laughed. "Aren't they fun? We thought of you when we saw them." The room chuckled like it was all part of a harmless joke. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, and said, "They're cute." Inside, I felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't about the necklace. It wasn't about the socks. It was about what they both represented. One gift said, "We see you. You matter." The other said, "We didn't think much about you at all." I looked around the table at the faces lit by candlelight, at the family I'd poured my life into, and I realized somewhere along the way I had slipped into the background. That was the moment I knew I'd become invisible in a room I helped build. That moment at the table didn't come out of nowhere. It was years in the making. Derek wasn't just my son. For a long time, he was my reason for getting up in the morning. His father, Nolan, was a good man, but his work in construction often took him away for weeks at a time. Then when Derek was in high school, Nolan had a stroke. He passed not long after, and suddenly it was just Derek and me. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Billing clerk at a plumbing supply company during the day and substitute receptionist at a dentist's office when they needed extra coverage. I kept the bills paid, made sure Derek had clean clothes, and put food on the table. I never made him feel the weight of it, even when the checking account got down to double digits. Every science fair, every school play, every football game, I was there. I drove him to weekend soccer tournaments, sat through endless piano recitals, and clapped the loudest. I was the one who scraped together off $500 for his first used car, even though it meant skipping new glasses for myself that year. When he went off to college, I cried for 2 days straight. But I also felt proud. He was building his life, and I thought I'd always have a place in it. Then during his last year at school, he met Kimberly. She was polite enough in the beginning, shook my hand and thanked me for dinner when she came over. She had a way of smiling that felt measured, like she wanted to be pleasant, but not too close. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just newness. People need time to warm up. But over the years, I noticed how little effort she made to know me. If I offered to help with something, she'd wave it off. "Oh, we've got it." If I tried to chat about her work, she'd give short answers and then turn to Derek. It wasn't rude in an obvious way, more like keeping a polite fence up. When they got married, the shift became clearer. Holiday plans weren't discussed with me. I'd hear about them after they were set. Phone calls with Derek were shorter, sometimes with Kimberly on speaker, sometimes with her in the background asking him to wrap it up. I still tried. I'd drop off meals when I knew they were busy. I'd send care packages for no reason. I'd text little updates or funny photos. Most of the time, the replies were a thumbs-up emoji or thanks. And then Joan moved to town. That was when the real distance set in. Joanne was retired from a bank job, had a big personality, and lived just 15 minutes away from Derek and Kimberly. Almost overnight, she became the center of their family world. She was at every dinner, every barbecue, every small gathering. My invites stopped coming. I'd hear from neighbors about how nice it was that Derek's family was all together for the 4th of July, or how beautiful Kimberly's baby shower was. I wasn't there for either. One year, I found out about my granddaughter's birthday party through Facebook photos. There she was, smiling with frosting on her cheeks, blowing out candles while surrounded by friends and family, including Joanne. My name wasn't on the guest list. No one had called. I stared at those pictures for a long time that night. I didn't cry. I just sat there wondering how a person could go from being at the center of someone's life to being a footnote without a fight, without a big argument, without any explanation at all. I told myself it was just how things were now. Families change. People have their own lives. But deep down, I kept hoping for some sign that I still mattered to them. So, when Derek called this past December and invited me for Christmas dinner, I let myself believe maybe things were turning around. Maybe I'd been too sensitive. Maybe they missed me too. Maybe there'd be room for me at the table again. I didn't expect a necklace or anything close to it, but I thought maybe there'd be some gesture, something that said, "We're glad you're here." Instead, I got socks. And that was the moment I knew hope wasn't enough anymore. The thing about that Christmas day is I saw how it was going to play out the moment I walked in. Joan was already in the prime spot in the living room, draped in a soft cream sweater, glass of wine in her hand, and her purse hanging neatly on the arm of the chair like it belonged there. She had the air of someone who knew she was the most important person in the room. Kimberly leaned on the back of her chair, laughing at something she'd just said, like they were the stars of their own show. When we were called to the table, Joanne was led right to the middle between Derek and Kimberly with a place setting that had a little sprig of rosemary tied to the napkin. "For you, Mom," Kimberly said to her, smiling like it was a private moment just for them. My seat was at the very end, across from an unused high chair with a strap hanging loose and a pile of winter coats slumped over the next chair. The table runner didn't even reach my end. The food looked like it had been arranged for photographs. Tiny garnishes in just the right places. Glossy dinner rolls in a silver basket. Before anyone took a bite, Kimberly paused everyone so she could get a photo for the memories, angling her phone just right to capture the centerpiece. And of course, Joanne. I passed the dishes quietly when they came my way. Nobody asked what I'd been up to lately or how my drive from Jacksonville was. Instead, the talk stayed between Derek, Kimberly, and Joanne. They covered everything from the new Italian restaurant they'd tried to Joanne's Pilates class to a long conversation about a wine subscription Derek had bought for her. Halfway through the meal, Kimberly glanced at me with a quick smile and said, "Tracy, you're holding up well. You know, it's harder for women to age gracefully these days with all the stress out there." She took a sip of wine before I could respond, then turned back to Joanne to ask about her upcoming trip to Charleston. It was the kind of comment that sounds like a compliment if you're not paying attention, but I heard the edge in it. Dessert came out, and while we were still eating, Derek stood up with a small gold box in his hand. "We wanted to give this to you, Joanne," he said. His voice was warmer than I'd heard it all evening. She opened the lid slowly, gasping as she saw the diamond necklace inside. "Oh my goodness, Derek, it's beautiful!" Kimberly rushed over to clasp it around her mother's neck, turning her toward the room so everyone could admire it. "Just a little thank you," Derek said, "for always being there for us." Everyone clapped. Someone raised a glass. Joanne blushed like she was on stage. Then, in the middle of a conversation about where Joanne might wear the necklace, Derek turned toward me like he just remembered. "Oh, and for you, Mom." He reached under the table, pulled out a pair of bright turquoise socks with cupcakes on them, and set them directly on my plate. "No wrapping paper, no bow, no card." Kimberly laughed. "Aren't they cute? We saw them and thought of you." A couple of people chuckled and went right back to talking. There was no thank you for coming. "No, we're glad you're here." Not even eye contact when they handed them over. "Just socks." I smiled the way you do when you don't want to make a scene and folded them neatly in my lap. As the night went on, I sat back and watched the way they all leaned toward Joanne, asking her opinion on the smallest things, making sure her glass stayed full. I might as well have been another chair at the table, and sitting there, with the hum of conversation around me and the socks tucked under my hand, it became painfully clear I'd finally overstayed my welcome at my own son's table. When Nolan passed, everything in my life shifted overnight. One minute we were sitting at the kitchen table talking about how the lawn needed mowing, and the next, he was gone. Massive heart attack. Quick, no warning. I had no time to prepare. Not for losing him, and not for what life would look like after. For months, I moved through each day like I was just trying to keep my balance. I filled the silence with small routines. Morning coffee on the porch, a crossword puzzle after lunch, evening news at 6. But the quiet felt heavy. I didn't want to disappear into that silence, so I made it my mission to stay close to my family. I offered to babysit whenever I could. I'd drive over with bags of groceries when I knew things were busy for Derek and Kimberly. On the kids' birthdays, I'd tuck some cash in a card with a little handwritten note. Most of it went unacknowledged. A quick thanks and a text if I was lucky. Sometimes nothing at all. At family dinners, I tried to make myself easy to have around. I spoke less, listened more. I dressed simply, never anything that would draw attention. I always brought something for the table, whether it was a pie or a dish I knew they liked. Still, I could feel myself becoming more of a background presence. I'd sit quietly while conversations moved around me. It was easier than pushing my way in. One memory sticks with me. When Derek and Kimberly had their youngest, I spent weeks crocheting a baby blanket. Soft yellow yarn, thick enough to keep a newborn warm. I wrapped it neatly in tissue paper, tied it with ribbon, and handed it to Kimberly with a smile. She thanked me politely, set it aside, and moved on. Months later, I stopped by their house to drop something off. As I walked past the garage, I noticed a pile of things near the door. Old toys, worn-out shoes, and my blanket. It was bunched up in a box labeled dog stuff. I stood there for a moment looking at it. The thought of their Labrador lying on it didn't bother me because it was dirty. It bothered me because it had meant so much to me when I made it. And clearly, it hadn't meant much to them. That was the day I started to pull back. I stopped calling every Sunday. Then I stopped sending holiday cards. I figured if they wanted to hear from me, they knew where to find me. There's a difference between giving up and letting go. I hadn't given up, but I'd started letting go. And the strange thing was, once I created that space, I began to feel lighter. It didn't mean the loneliness went away. It didn't mean I stopped missing Nolan or the way things used to be, but it gave me room to breathe without constantly wondering what I'd done wrong. I still showed up when invited, still kept the door open, but I stopped expecting to be at the center of their lives. And maybe that's why when Derek called this past December to invite me to Christmas dinner, I said yes without asking too many questions. I wasn't expecting miracles, but I wasn't expecting socks either. Letting go gave me space I hadn't had in years. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Some days I'd walk around the house, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting just to fill the hours. Other days I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching neighbors head off to work, wondering what it would feel like to have somewhere to be again. One chilly afternoon in February, I decided to stop by the public library. I hadn't been in there for ages. I thought I'd pick up a book or two, maybe something to keep my mind busy. That's where it started. I was in the large print section when I overheard two women talking at a nearby table. They were about my age, leaning over a flyer. One said, "They're offering free digital skills workshops over at the community center. Even teach you how to sell things online." The other laughed. "I don't even know how to turn on an iPad." Something about that made me pause. I'd never been much with technology myself, but the idea of learning something new tugged at me. On my way out, I asked the librarian about it. She handed me a schedule and pointed to a beginner iPad class starting the following Tuesday. The morning of the class, I almost didn't go. I worried I'd look foolish, but I reminded myself no one in that room was there to judge. We were all just trying to learn. The instructor was patient. We started with the basics, turning the iPad on and off, connecting to Wi-Fi, opening the camera. I took notes like I was back in school. Week by week, I grew more comfortable. I learned how to use Google Docs, browse recipes online, even watch videos without accidentally closing the screen. A few months later, I signed up for a free Canva workshop. That's when things started to click. I could create simple designs, add photos, and make them look like something out of a magazine. An idea began to form. I'd always collected recipes, not just the ones from my own kitchen, but from my mother, my grandmother, friends, even neighbors from years ago. Some were handwritten on recipe cards, others clipped from old magazines. They weren't just instructions for food. They were pieces of life. I decided to put them together in a way that would feel personal, not a fancy cookbook, just a small e-letter people could read each week. I called it Whisk and Wisdom. Each email would have one recipe and one short note about something I'd learned in life about love, loss, mistakes, or just how to make pie crust without fear. I bought a small scanner and began uploading each recipe. I typed them out neatly and added a paragraph or two about where they came from. Sometimes it was a story about the person who gave it to me. Other times it was about a memory tied to the dish. To send them out, I signed up for a MailerLite account. I started with just 8 email addresses: friends from church, a couple of neighbors, and my cousin in Ohio. The first email went out on a Thursday morning. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the send button, feeling like I was about to do something enormous. And when I got my first reply that afternoon, a simple, "This brought back memories. Thank you," I knew I wanted to keep going. Every week I sent out another recipe and note. Slowly people began forwarding them to friends. One woman asked if she could print the emails to share with her quilting group. Another told me she'd started a binder just for my recipes. Within 6 months, I had 200 subscribers. Most were women over 60. They wrote to me about their own kitchens, their own losses, their own ways of finding joy again. One day, I got an email from a writer at a local food magazine. She'd seen my e-letter through a friend and wanted to feature my story. We met for coffee, and I told her how it all began with an iPad class at the library. She laughed and said, "You've built a community from your kitchen table." When the article came out, a few more people subscribed. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Useful. It wasn't about the numbers. It wasn't even about the recipes. It was about connection. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was fading into the background. The recipes were just the beginning. A few of my subscribers began asking if I had more. Not just the single recipes in the emails, but a way to keep them organized. One woman wrote, "I wish I had a whole book of these to pass down to my granddaughter." That gave me an idea. I opened an Etsy shop. I didn't know much about selling online, but the library classes had given me enough confidence to try. I started small downloadable recipe journals people could print at home. I designed simple covers in Canva, added line pages for writing recipes, and paired them with some of my own favorites. Then I added vintage-style pantry labels, flour, sugar, cinnamon, with old-fashioned fonts and soft colors. I'd always loved the look of tidy labeled jars in a kitchen, and I thought other women my age might too. At first the sales trickled in, a few dollars here and there. Every time someone bought something, Etsy would send me a little cha-ching notification. It was never about the amount. It was about knowing someone somewhere had chosen something I made. Then one morning, I woke up to 37 orders overnight. I thought it was a mistake. Turns out a small YouTuber who focuses on cozy home projects had featured my shop in one of her videos. She showed my recipe journals as part of her favorite finds and linked to my store in her description. That week, I had more sales than I'd had in the previous 3 months combined. I decided to reinvest some of that money. I bought a used DSLR camera from a pawn shop. Nothing fancy, but it let me take clear, bright photos of my products. I upgraded my website so the newsletter and shop were connected in one place. Before long, I was earning about $3,000 a month from my digital products, enough to cover my bills with extra left over for things I'd only daydreamed about. I started writing down bigger goals, not just for the shop, but for my life. I wanted to take an RV trip across the country, just me and the open road. I wanted to start a podcast where older women could share their stories, the kind you never see in magazines, but that mattered just the same. I wanted to create scholarships so women over 60 could take online business courses without worrying about the cost. I didn't tell my family any of this. To them, I was still just into baking and crafts. I'd hear Derek say it when people asked what I was up to. Oh, Mom keeps busy in the kitchen, little projects. They didn't ask questions, and I stopped offering answers, not out of spite, just self-preservation. I'd learned the hard way that sharing too much with people who don't value it can drain the joy right out of what you're building. So I kept it all tucked away in my own corner of the world. The morning after Christmas, I woke up before the rest of the house. I'd slept lightly, my mind replaying the night before. The necklace, the socks, the way I'd sat there invisible while they clinked glasses around Joan. I dressed, packed my small bag, and carried it downstairs. The kitchen was quiet. The smell of last night's dinner still lingered. On the counter sat a pile of mail and a half-empty bottle of wine. From my purse, I pulled out a plain manila envelope. I prepared it before I left Jacksonville, though I hadn't been sure I'd actually use it. On the front, I wrote Derek in small, neat letters. Inside were 4 printed pages. The current subscriber count for Whisk and Wisdom, 4,162 at the time I printed it. A breakdown of my Etsy shop revenue from the past year, over $36,000. Early signups for a podcast I plan to launch in the spring. 312 names and emails already on the list. No explanations, no big note, just the facts. I placed it squarely in the center of the counter where Derek would see it. Then I zipped up my coat, grabbed my keys, and left without waking anyone. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Kimberly. "Why didn't you tell us you were doing this?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Me, because I never needed your permission. The next day was quiet. No calls, no further texts. I went about my routine, answered subscriber emails, took a photo for my next Etsy listing, and made a pot of chili. 2 days later, Derek called. His voice had that tone people use when they're trying to sound casual, but have an agenda. "Hey, Mom, I saw what you left. That's a lot. I didn't know you were doing so much." I said, "I've been at it for a while." He hesitated. "I was talking with Kimberly, and we think we could help you scale this, bring it to a bigger audience, add some marketing, maybe new product lines. We could really grow it." I leaned back in my chair and let his words sit for a moment. "This wasn't built to impress you." I said, "Finally, it was built to save me." He was quiet. "I know," I said, "but this is mine. I'm not looking for a partner. Not in this." There was a pause. Then he said, "All right, well, if you change your mind." We ended the call soon after. I set my phone down and felt a calm settle over me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't explained myself to exhaustion. I just told the truth. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. 3 months after that Christmas, I was standing in a banquet room at the community center, looking out at a sea of round tables filled with women my age and older. It was the annual spring luncheon, and they'd asked me to speak. The theme was, "Late Blooms Still Blossom." I didn't bring notes. I just told the truth. I talked about Whisk and Wisdom, how it started with 8 email addresses and a handful of scanned recipe cards. I shared how the Etsy shop grew, how I'd learned more about running an online business in my late 60s than I ever thought possible. And then I told them about Christmas, how one woman at the table was given a $10,000 necklace and another was given socks. I let them fill in the rest. They laughed in the right places. They shook their heads when they understood the hurt. And when I finished, they stood and clapped, not out of politeness, but the way people clap when they've seen a piece of themselves in your story. Afterward, women came up to me one by one. Some wanted to know more about running an online shop. Others just wanted to say, "I've been there." That connection face-to-face was worth more to me than any gift could be. A week later, I got an email from my youngest granddaughter, Lacey. She's 15, just starting to figure out who she is. Her email was short. Lacey, Granny, can you show me how to start a newsletter? I think what you're doing is cool. I sat back in my chair and let the words sink in. I'd never heard her use cool and granny in the same sentence before. I wrote her back right away and said yes. We started meeting on Zoom every Saturday afternoon. I taught her how to set up an email list, choose a simple design, and write something people actually want to open. She picked it up quickly. Her newsletter was about books and little poems she writes. Nothing fancy, but all hers. Each week, I'd watch her confidence grow, and it felt like watching a seed sprout. One evening after our call, I sat in my kitchen with my own printed recipe book open in front of me. I was making chicken pot pie for dinner, humming to myself as the dough came together. I didn't get the necklace. I didn't get the spotlight, but I got clarity. I got peace. And I got my voice back. That's worth more than anything that could ever be placed in a gift box. When I look back now, I see clearly how quickly older women can be pushed to the side once we're no longer the ones cooking every meal, watching every grandchild, or making sure every holiday runs smoothly. It's like once we're not serving a role in someone else's story, they forget we have our own. But I also see something else. I see how much space that leaves for us to write the next chapter ourselves. Since that Christmas, Whisk and Wisdom has grown past 5,000 subscribers. My Etsy shop's digital recipe bundle, the one with the handwritten cards and old family stories, was picked up by a popular retirement lifestyle brand and featured in their holiday gift guide. Orders came in from places I've never even visited. One morning I got a letter in the mail from a woman in Montana. She said she'd been given my sweet potato pie email by a friend after losing her mother. She wrote, "Reading your words felt like sitting at my mom's table again. I didn't realize how much I needed that." I sat with that letter for a long time. That's when I knew I wanted to do more than just share my recipes. I wanted to share the stories behind them. Not just mine, but other women's too. That's how the Legacy Kitchen series started. I began inviting women from my newsletter community to send in their favorite recipes along with the stories that made them matter. Some were tied to traditions, others to people they'd lost, and some to moments they just wanted remembered. I published one every week, and people responded with warmth I could feel through the screen. It wasn't just about food. It was about proof. Proof that we still have something to give, something worth passing down, even when the world decides we've had our turn. As the year wound down, I sat at my kitchen table on New Year's Eve with my laptop open. My next post was ready, the one I'd been thinking about for weeks. The title was simple. The gift was never the necklace. In it, I wrote about the difference between being given something shiny to wear and finding something real to hold on to. I wrote about socks and diamonds, about being overlooked, and about the power of deciding to stop waiting for permission. When I finished, I hit publish, closed the laptop, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. I didn't need anyone's applause. I didn't need to see who would read it first. I knew it would reach the people it was meant for. And that's the thing. I'm not chasing anyone's approval anymore. This is my life, my work, my voice. No apology. If you've ever been given less because someone assumed you needed less, hit subscribe. And if you've made it this far and still won't subscribe, then tell me in the comments. What's the worst gift someone ever gave you thinking you wouldn't notice?